Hello everyone, it's Rachel from Desert Blossom Crafts here, back with another stitch tutorial. Today I'm going to teach you how to crochet the moss stitch. This stitch is really a classic that you'll see a lot of places around the internet. But today I'm not just going to be teaching you how to do the regular moss stitch, so make sure and stick around with me. I'm going to also be showing you how to crochet the moss stitch with stripes and also how to crochet it in the round. So let's jump right into the tutorial. Just a quick note on materials, I am using worsted weight yarn and an H crochet hook or 5mm. To get started, you just want to make a slip knot. Now I usually like to start my stitches with foundation single crochet, and while that does work really well for the moss stitch, well, it works okay, I should say, it's not my favorite. It's almost a little bit too stretchy, so I'm going to go ahead and chain this time. If you're used to my tutorials, this will probably look rather strange. But you can chain any even number for the moss stitch. So 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I will do 10 chains. Now what I'm going to do next is single crochet in the second chain from my hook. And for row 1, you have two different options. I am going to just single crochet across because I like to have a regular single crochet row at the bottom, but if you'd like, you can do the moss stitch. What this would look like would be to chain 1, skip the next chain, and single crochet in the next chain, and just repeat that across. So this is what it would look like. This is kind of the pattern we will be doing with the moss stitch, and I'll show you more in a second. But for me, I am just going to take this out and I'm going to go ahead and do regular single crochets across. So this kind of gives the effect of foundation single crochet without it being quite as stretchy and looking strange. So here is my finished single crochet row. For row 2, which is technically the first moss stitch row for what I'm doing, I'm going to chain 1 and turn, and this chain is going to count as a stitch. I know it usually doesn't, but for the moss stitch this will count as a stitch. I'm going to single crochet in the first stitch, chain 1, and this is going to be similar to what I showed you in, like, if you wanted to do the alternate row for number 1. Skip the next single crochet and single crochet in the next. And just repeat this. Chain 1, skip the next single crochet in the next. So I should have to do this 2 more times. 1 and 2. This is my last stitch here. Okay, so let's chain 1, and you can make this chain a little bit looser because we are going to be working into it. Now for row 3, instead of going into the first single crochet, we're going to single crochet into the chain space. So it's a little bit even easier to go into because it's just right there. So just make a single crochet, chain 1, and go into the next chain space. And this is basically the moss stitch right here. It's chaining 1 and then single crocheting into the next chain space. That's really all it is. So here I have 2 left. I'm going to go right here, chain 1, and my last one will be in this first chain 1 that I made. So I'm going to go right here. So that's what it looks like. That's why you want to make it a little bit loose so you can go into it nicely. Now I will note that some tutorials do say to chain 2 at the start because that might make it a little bit easier to insert your hook. However, I find that that leaves the edges a little bit jagged, which is why I prefer the chain 1 method, but you can feel free to experiment with that and see what you like best. So I'm just going to keep repeating this row though. I've chained 1, I'm going to single crochet in the first chain space, and do that all the way across. So the moss stitch is super simple because it's just this 1 row repeat. And literally the rule you can keep in your mind is that you're always going to be crocheting into a chain 1 if you do it the same method as me. So here I am at the end again, and I'm just going to go right into that chain 1 that I made and make my last single crochet. And that is the moss stitch worked in rows. So here I have 3 moss stitch rows and then one that I just did with the simple single crochet. Alrighty, so at this point it's time to bring in our second color. So let's learn how to change colors in the moss stitch. So to do this, you're always going to want to change on the last stitch of a row. So here I've made a single crochet and a chain, and I just have this last one to go into. So all I'm going to do to change colors is insert my hook into that chain space just like normal and pretend like you're making a regular single crochet. But once you get here, you're going to stop. You're going to grab the working end of your new color. So this is pink that I'm using. Just give it a little bit slack because you're going to weave in this end later. And go ahead and yarn over with the new color and pull through so that you change. So what we have here, this is a pretty standard color change. We basically yarn over of the last stitch of the round. We yarn over with the new color, and that way the last stitch of the previous row still has the main color on it. So let me show you that one more time. So I've begun my single crochet. I should have 2 loops on my hook. I'm grabbing the end right here. Just let it kind of hang and put it over the hook and pull through. Alright, so now here you can just chain 1, turn, and continue the exact same process. So now I would single crochet into that chain space, chain 1, skip the single crochet and single crochet in the next. And you can see, if I keep going here, that is what it starts to look like. So the moss stitch can look really pretty in stripes because the new color will look kind of like it's coming down into the old color rows, and it just looks really nice. So that is how to make stripes. If you have any questions on that, make sure to leave them in the comments. Now let's tackle our last section of this tutorial. Okay, so for the last thing we need to do is learn how to crochet the moss stitch in the round. So I'm going to start making chains again. When you're working the moss stitch in the round, you're going to want to start with any even number of chains. So the multiple is slightly different when you're working in the round versus rows. In rows, you want to make sure you have an odd number once you start working the moss stitch because you have a stitch on either end. But in the round, it's just continuous, and so you're not going to have an extra stitch, and therefore it will be an even number that you need. So let's see. Here I have 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 16, 17. Alright, let's do 16 stitches for this. Now what I'm going to do next is just join with a slip stitch to this first chain. So make sure it doesn't twist at all. Just insert your hook and grab the working yarn. Make sure you don't grab the tail. Make sure you grab the working yarn. And slip stitch it into a circle. And you can make this a lot bigger, like if you want to make a bigger tube or something. Now I'm going to go ahead and tighten this slip stitch because we're not going to work into that part of it. So I'm going to chain 1, pull the chain a little tight too, and then we're going to single crochet into the same stitch where we made the slip stitch. Okay, so see that. So that is where we slip stitched. We're single crocheting there as well. Now this is where you can do one of two things. You can either single crochet all the way around, kind of like I did for the rows, or you can just start working in the moss stitch right away. So since I did the single crochet around in the row tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and do it the other way here. So chain 1, skip the next chain, and single crochet in the next one. Chain 1, skip the next chain, single crochet in the next, and just repeat this around. So chain 1, here's the one I'm skipping, here's the one I am going into, and I'll meet you back when I get all the way around. So here's my cute little moss stitch circle. When you get to the end, let me just show you what we have here. We're gonna have one chain left right here, and then don't get confused by this last thing that looks like a stitch here. That is the slip stitch that we already went into in this single crochet. So if you didn't pull it tight, it will look a little bit more obvious. That's why I recommend you pull it tight, so that it just looks like you have this last chain. So to finish, we're going to chain 1 and skip that last chain like we always do and just slip stitch in the first single crochet. And that is the end of round 1 for the moss stitch. And I'm going to pull this slip stitch tight as well because we still need to slip stitch here into the next chain 1 space to start off. Because if we chain 1 here and then work a single crochet into here, it's just going to look a little bit strange. So I like to slip stitch right into this next chain space, pull that a little bit tight, chain 1, pull that a little bit tight, and then do my first single crochet there. And now that's kind of how we start the round, and then we can come back just in the same way. So now we're just going to continue in the moss stitch, single crochet, chain 1, skip the single crochet, go in the next chain. And this is exactly the same, it looks the same, right, as you're working in rows. It just feels a little different because you're going to have your finger kind of in this ring right here. So I just kind of like to hold my 2 middle fingers there to keep it steady while I'm finding the next stitch to go into. So I've just been repeating that all the way around, and this is what it will look like when you get to the end. Here is that the last single crochet we'll be skipping. We're just going to chain 1 and slip stitch in the first single crochet. And to continue in the round, you will just repeat this. So at this point, remember the next step is to slip stitch again into the next chain 1, pull that tight, chain 1, single crochet, chain 1, and repeat. Okay, so there you can see the moss stitch starting to form. The single crochets should always be alternate to each other in the moss stitch because you're always single crocheting into the chain spaces, not the previous single crochets. Alright, so I think that is all we have to talk about in this tutorial. Thanks guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you had a favorite part of this tutorial, like the stripes or the round, if you learned something new, I would love to hear about it. Just leave a comment and I'll get back to you. I love hearing from you guys and helping you any way I can. For lots more stitch tutorials, I would love if you come subscribe. Also, I'm releasing new videos every Tuesday and Friday in 2021. Thanks again for watching. Bye!